Hey, ever wonder how a concept artist or designer takes an idea from a very rough sketch and brings it all the way through the design pipeline to a finish? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about here in today's video. I'll be going over a lot of topics today, from thumbnailing to iterations and variations, to mastering the balance between aesthetics, function, and narrative with your designs. And what's special about this video is I'm basically going to be using mostly all my student examples from my design classes. So if you are a student or you're simply just curious on how a design goes through the whole pipeline from start to finish, this will be a video for you. My name is Tyler Edlin. I've been a professional concept artist and designer now for about 15 years, and I teach a lot of classes. Some of this work will be from my 2 design classes at CG Master Academy, links below, as well as my own private mentorships. With that said, let's get into this. So a huge part about design is communication and messaging. It's not simply about making pretty pictures. It's not art for art's sake. It's about ensuring that the purpose and function is clearly understood by the intended audience. And so for my first topic today, I'd like to go into the design pipeline. Now, the pipeline ensures that everything kind of goes through a systematic process and that the idea is refined properly. Of course, this goes from simply just taking raw concepts in thumbnail sketch all the way to the finished design. Here's a great example from my former student Maria on how she went from simple little blocky layout sketches to a fully fleshed out concept of a computer terminal, right? Everything goes through this process. Now, if an audience just looks at your idea and starts scratching their head, usually that's not a good sign. It should inherently be easy to understand and very digestible. And when I'm working professionally, I simply have to make sure every design, every drawing is as clear as possible. The idea simply should be able to explain itself as it's presented to both artists and non-artists, from producers to project managers, right? There's a lot of non-artists that have to look and digest your designs. And just last term, Sarah took a lot of her concepts each and every week from very rough and very simple sketches to something that can communicate what her intended purpose was, like in this awesome Gougie architecture roadside diner. Now, a lot of terms and labels get thrown around in this field, and so just for your information, let's go over a lot of the more popular ones that you should come to terms with if you want to pursue a prospective career in this field. The first phase of design is always in exploration. The client simply wants to just see a number of different ideas and options for whatever their assignment is. So if, let's say in this example here is a pillar, we want to see a variety of different ideas that could work for the pillar. Then that would bring us to stage 2. Usually they'll choose which ones they like, which ones they don't like, or which features they want to move forward with, and you start refining that. So see, it gets a little bit more specific as the design gets pushed forward. And then once it's really locked down, let's say, like maybe just like, let's go with 1 or 2 here, then little variations are made on that design to further tweak how it could look. And then finally, those revisions are implemented, and that would be taken to the final step. And of course, one of the best things you could do as a design student is emulate this process and workflow in your own portfolio to show that you not only understand the design process, but you can implement it in work to some capacity. So let's look at another example of this. This was my own little buggy that I was doodling. So the first one is thumbnails, right? And the second one is thumbnails. But these thumbnails on the bottom here, right? Those are the typical kind of thumbnail explorations that we just looked at. Often enough, and this is a huge misconception out there, is that like thumbnails are always the first step, and technically they should, but that doesn't mean they're the first step that I would show a client. Thumbnails are often just memory aids and visual tools for myself. It's how I can get out initial ideas. But most of the time, they're not good enough and they're not clear enough to present to a client. So often, you just have to take your thumbnails and refine them enough so that, again, those non-artists and typically almost anyone could look at them and understand visually what the idea is. Of course, then you can move things down to iterations, and of course, then the last phase would be these model sheets. This ensures that the design and idea is ready for the 3D pipeline. Often it's really great to show your idea in very clear angles, because this question comes up all the time. What is the best angle to draw a design? Probably an angle that communicates the most information. I love this overhead 3/4 angle most of the time because, again, we get 3 different angles in one picture. Of course, doing side views, back views, top or rear views additionally is often required just to show further dimensions of the idea. Have I had to do model sheets on every project I've ever worked on? No, but it does come up often enough. And this applies to everything, from characters to props to environments. And you can see here how my student Gaida implemented all of that. She started with simple rough thumbnails, progressed those to the full-fledged exploration sketches, and then kind of did iterations and variations on those all in one step before taking them to a final. So see, there's always a little bit of variations in this process, and some people call different steps different things, but generally it always kind of goes in this sort of funnel from vague to specific. In some instances, on Tyler Bourne's Rift generator here that we worked on a couple years ago, it's not only about explaining what the pure design language looks like, with a certain amount of consistency, which is really important, but often enough it's important to break things down and to show what goes inside of something or how well it fits together with other components of the idea. Remember, a good drawing is about a drawing that is clear and self-explanatory. This isn't about making a pretty picture for the sake of it. And so now that we looked at a little bit of the process, let's get to my second topic here. How to think like a designer. How to be a problem solver. Design isn't just about making things look cool, right? It's solving problems with a specific purpose. To think like a designer, you want to focus on problem solving through clarity and purpose. Approach each project with clear goals, balancing functionality, narrative, and aesthetics. Break everything down into stages, starting with those broad shapes and concepts and then refining the details over time as we just looked at. And what I always love to encourage my students to ask themselves when they're drawing is how and why. Why does this design matter? How does it work? Be observant, right? Be curious. Often design is about coming up with solutions that are both meaningful and visually compelling and finding the balance in there. Design often follows 2 key philosophies. Form follows function and form precedes function. Form follows function emphasizes practicality, where the design's purpose indicates its shape, resulting in clean and utilitarian aesthetics. In contrast, form precedes functions prioritize aesthetics and creativity, with visual appeal shaping how the design functions, and it even compromises practicality. And you can see that here in these awesome examples from Dojo here, right? Both with the pistol and his clock design, right? They both have a very practical sense. Everything is thought with functionality in mind. And the aesthetics kind of came after the fact. Comparatively to these designs, which we explore in week 3, form is coming before the function. This is a stool that is first kind of a pencil, or this is like a little robot that's informed by the speaker, etc., etc. It's more focused on the aesthetics than the practicality of the functionality here. Effective design usually finds a way to balance these 2 approaches in many scenarios, blending purpose with artistic expression. Now, a great way to do this is to apply labels to everything. This is one of the first core lessons we really focus on and practice in many of my courses. Now, look at this. An ancient crown, that looks evil, right? A great example from Zach. Or how about a retro camper, right? That looks welcoming from Marie. And then we have a compassionate baker that looks strong and stern, right? From Casper. Again, really great designs, and they're always derived from that initial label, right? That they set out at the goal at step 1. And you can see here where this may or may not be a problem. Like every term I get a student like, hey, I want to design a dam, right? And we get something that looks like this. Now this may or may not be a dam, but it's too simple. It's just geometric shapes and forms in perspective. It's essentially like a perspective assignment. It doesn't really feel like a design. For this to be a design, you'd have to get really specific with what you want out of it, right? Your intent. So if we actually look at this, I want to design a 15th century stone dam that exudes practicality and showcases a weathered charm of centuries of use. See, that's a lot more specific, and now it's starting to feel like a bit design, because we could take the same basic premise of a shape and form, and we could give it a very different identity. Right? Like, what if we wanted to design an industrial age dam crafted from robust iron and copper, seamlessly blending rich, ornate details with a sense of elegance and practicality? So, see, it's like the same sort of layout, but aesthetically, they're very different. So, if you're not specific with your intents, your design could be interpreted or led down numerous different explorations, and it may or may not be at all what the client needs or intended to get out of you. So with clear goals and intention set up at the start, usually designs come in stages. You're not going to figure out everything all at once. You're not going to probably start with details. Like, imagine if you're sitting down to draw a character or a person. You probably wouldn't start drawing with fingers and then extend out to the hand and go up to the face. That'd be a really awkward way to come up with a character design, right? You usually start with the overall gesture, the massive shapes that make up the character, and go to the smaller details as you go. This applies to everything from architecture to vehicles to full environments. This just ensures that the design is going to remain clear, cohesive, and visually effective throughout the remainder of the process, since everything starts with the initial shapes and the proportions. So you could see in these very first steps here by a number of different students how, like, without any actual details, we can almost get a sense for what these different objects and designs are, right? Anything from a speeder to a little stove to a house to a character. The big shapes make up the bulk of the silhouette, which is always effective and coming first. It solves basically what something is. Usually in the second phase, the more medium shapes, this is a great opportunity to show how something works or fits together. Again, still no real details, but certainly there's a lot more information present at each and every one of these ideas here. You could start to see that, right? On the speeder, we bring in the controls, we bring in the seats, we bring in the thrusters or the guns. Or on the stove, we bring in the doors and the handles and the ventilations. Or maybe even on the roof, to the walls and to windows and doors on a house, and of course to the character, you could start bringing in the aesthetics of the clothes and how they are all layered. Now with the small, this is where things can get a little more interesting, right? This is where the details are. This is your opportunity to show something very specific about your designs. So right, like on the speeder, we can show that it's a little more old or weathered. We could start adding a lot more little greebles into the functionality of the mechanisms. We could add stripes and graphics, anything that shows like, hey, this is a racer, or we could show that this is, for a bunch of contraband owned by outlaws, depending on what little smaller aesthetics we put on. Now with the stove, this became a lot more Lovecraftian and aesthetics. We have a little bit of the tentacles and octopus kind of themes in there. We could start to see more labels. We could see some visual wear and tear. It really is just coming into its own. And same with the house, the little more standard and straightforward, but we could start to see a lot more of the framing and some of the detail work on the chimneys. It's just becoming a lot more specific overall. Even with the character, we could see it's taken on a purely punk aesthetic with the patches, the pins, all the metal and the trinkets and the accessories, right? It starts to really bring out the personality of the character is in those smaller details. But these are all built upon those initial shapes and those initial decisions made at the start. Now look here what Arnold did in week 2. See how he starts with very simple primitive shapes like the rectangle and modifies it by stretching and pulling it to form the very premise of this design. Then thematic elements are brought in to enrich it with personality and function. Now, he's really good at balancing that here before he jumps into smaller details like the patterns and the rhythms that are brought in on top of the local color to complete that overall layout at a fairly rough but simple level. Further shading and texturing the details are then brought in to fully bring it to life and to communicate this idea here. I think he did a wonderful job. Now let's move on to my final little topic here today, and that is style in design and the choices that they are made from. Simply put, style in your design is derived from a series of deliberate and intentional choices made throughout your project. These include aesthetic considerations, such as the complexity of shapes, the use of color, to overall visual tone. It also encompasses the thematic direction of your project, right? Reflecting the goals, the messaging, and the emotional response it aims to evoke. Additionally, style is influenced by practical constraints such as budgetary limitations, the skill level of the designer or team, and the medium throughout the design will be executed. Together, these factors shape a cohesive and purposeful style that balances that creativity, that purpose, and that feasibility of the idea. The elements of art, right, like line, form, and mass, are awesome ways to practice and interpret intentional use when coming up with designs. And I'm going to show you how 3 students use that in a week 4 assignment on photo references from trees. They're all interpreted very differently. Here, Rob Reed used a combination of mass and volume to show how he progressed from a line drawing to a fully formed tree using full color. Compared to what Ted did here, which was very simple, just keeping things a nice linear sort of line drawing, and added little bits of shapes of mass to indicate some light and shadow. Now, Allie did a bit of a combination of both these, first figuring out her shapes, digesting what makes up the primary components of the tree, and then she simply added more volumetric properties when she went to coloring and texture. So see, they're all very different interpretations using a different combination of artistic tools. So if you're still not sure what I mean, right, line is how you're going to utilize line. Mass is the quality and the combination of shapes. And volume is how 3-dimensional something is. Now, the trick here is that every picture is, of course, going to be made from a combination of these 3 elements. One should be dominant, another should be secondary. The issue tends to be when students aren't intentional with what or how many they're using of each of these properties, and their design ends up looking a little bit more muddy and disjointed as a result. So it's great to think beforehand, hey, do I want to draw this? Do I want to flat color it? Do I want to fully shade it with lighting and rendering and paint all the lighting on this? Just make that conscious decision when you're approaching a study. You'll get a lot further with it. So yeah, your artistic voice is the distinct expression of your creative perspective, shaped by the decisions you make throughout your artistic process. It emerges from a blend of personal preferences, your interpretation of the world around you, and the way you engage with the elements and principles of design. So whether we're doing rough thumbnails to refining those out over across various model sheets to deciding whether we want to use line or color, design is really about being intentful and refining something again, again, and again. The most common misconception or mistake that I would see a lot of students make is simply underestimating the amount of planning and forethought to go into coming up with any kind of design. They often just maybe get a reference, or even worse, skipping the reference, going right into a finalized drawing and calling that finished, right? Put it through the pipeline, work things over again and again till you get something a little better. But yeah, on screen, we're used to simply consuming finalized designs through and through. So don't feel discouraged if you're just doing one drawing and you're like, this doesn't look good. No, do 20 versions of that and then see how it looks. Guys, let me know below if you have any questions about my design classes. If you want to know any more about specific aspects of design, I'd be happy to make some more videos on this topic. But yeah, these are my favorite videos to make, so I'd love to make kind of more based off what you guys want to see. And I have links below for everything you need, including, a newsletter you can subscribe to and get some instant free goodies. All right, I'll catch you guys next time and have a wonderful week.